My name is David Bailey. I lead an organization called Erin. What we do is we come along Christian leaders in their communities to give them the tools to become reconciling communities. And one of the, we should take our name tags off. Hold up, sorry guys, I'm all jacked up. We do like workshops and trainings and develop curriculums, but one of the key elements of worship resourcing that is oftentimes overlooked is formational worship, like how people are being formed in worship, not just only the expression, not even just worship as hospitality, but how folks are being formed. And so we started this urban doxology songwriting internship almost, this summer will be the 10th summer, almost 10 summers ago, because we were coming out of a context where there was a lot of the innovation towards worship and the resourcing towards worship oftentimes goes to suburban places and resource places. And we're in this urban church context where it has a significantly high poverty rate. And there were Christians that were inspired by this concept called Christian community development, really pioneered by Dr. Perkins and a few others, John Perkins. And I kind of realized that people were thinking about spiritual development, they were thinking about economic development, they were thinking about community development, but a lot of folks were actually thinking about the development of the soul and how are people being formed spiritually. And so maybe another way of saying this is that we had a lot of vertical worship songs, but we didn't have a lot of horizontal worship songs. And so basically what I did was put together this program where you get young people 18 to 25. They would study theology, justice, reconciliation, urban context, how to be anthropologists. And instead of writing a paper, what they do is they write worship songs. And those worship songs become what we sing. So if you were in the worship service this morning or in this evening, if you were not familiar with the songs, that most likely was an original that came out of the internship. And so we do this theologically rich worship music that's also very relevant to the urban context. And this session is actually really great because Jonathan Brooks is also a really good friend of ours. And, we met through the CCDA context, and he has been serving his context in Inglewood. In the CCDA world, we talk about relocators. And so, I grew up in the suburbs, always with the church in the inner city, but we would commute back and forth. As soon as my sisters and myself and of course my wife had the opportunity to live somewhere, we decided to actually live in a community and cut the commute. And so we are what we call relocators. Jonathan Brooks, he was born and raised in Inglewood, went to college, and I'm not gonna tell all of his story, but oftentimes when you're upperly mobile as an African-American person, success is basically to be able to have enough money to be able to buy a house and live where white people live. And that's a really distorted understanding of success. And so God kind of both convicted both John and I we didn't know each other at the time, but had us to rethink about that. And so that caused me to move into under-resourced African-American community. And then it caused John to be what he's called a returner. So he wrote a really great book called Church Forsaken. And so in this workshop, what we're going to do is kind of share a little bit about worship in church forsaken spaces and how do you think about this. So I call him Brooks. Brooks is going to, he's going to share the 7 concepts, and we have the singers of urban doxology who, I'll let each of you introduce yourselves, and we have Terence who's is in Chicago, and so Brooks and Terence do a lot of collaboration. And basically we're going to kind of share a little bit about kind of our context and how we endeavor to embody Brooks's concepts in actual practice. And it's been kind of cool, because I think we probably met almost 10 years ago, I think. Yeah, we almost met 10 years ago in Chicago, and we've been kind of talking this out and trying to figure it out. I've kind of been trying to share notes for many years, and you kind of stay at something for a while, and we actually have principles and things that have kind of been learned. So yeah, that's a little bit what we're here for, and hopefully we'll share some ideas, and then we'll do some Q&A with whatever you want to ask about what we're talking about. All right, cool. So Ray, how about you start off? Kind of tell who you are, where you're from, and kind of what you're doing now.
Yes. Hi. How is everyone doing?
Can you turn all the microphones up? Thanks.
So my name is Ray Hudnell. I'm actually from right here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I actually went to Calvin College, so woo-woos. I see a few y'all in the back, or just one, but I'm excited to be here. But I moved to Richmond, Virginia, where I get to do ministry with these amazing people of God, and we do worship, and we travel, and we are really just about bringing unity. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Williams, born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. That's my city. But now I serve Baltimore. I serve in Washington, D.C. as the worship and arts pastor at a church called the District Church. And I also help manage the affinity groups that we have there. So those are kind of like my the two main things that I do there. I also, of course, am a part of urban Doxology.
Hey everybody, my name is Erin Rose. I am originally from Connecticut, but I live in Richmond, Virginia, and I've lived there for about 8 years. I currently serve as worship and teaching pastor of a church right in the middle of the hood, but it's a quickly gentrifying hood. And we have an intentionally multicultural, economically diverse congregation. So I have the joyful task of creating the worship life of that place, from the music to the prayers to the preaching. And it's my joy and my delight, but it's one of the more difficult things I probably will ever undertake in life, period. I am a member of, additionally at the church, I serve as a discipler for some young adults as they're like growing in leadership. And hopefully we're training them up to have them do the job that we're doing. So yes, I'm also a member of Urban Doxology. We've been around since January 2014 is when we officially started. And I sing alto.
Hi, my name is Makeda McCreary. I was born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. I currently serve as worship coordinator at the church that I grew up in. It's a Black Baptist church in the suburbs. They bougie Black folks, y'all. And I came to the internship and did urban doxology, and I consider East End, which is the church that Erin is pastor at, my home church. And so that's a multicultural church. And I just left a position at a majority white church that was ECC. So I've worked at a couple different places, but am currently in the Black Baptist.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Terence Gadsden. I serve on the faculty and staff at North Park University in Chicago. I'm originally from New Jersey, but I've been living in the Chicago area for the last 17 years. My wife and our family just recently moved to Evanston. And when I'm not working at North Park, I am a hip-hop DJ, turntablist. I've known Jonathan for a long time. We went to seminary together 4 years, so we're really tight. We're part of a group. But prior to me being at North Park, I served 12 years as a student pastor at Lawndale Christian Community Church on the west side. And so, yeah.
All right. And I'm Jonathan. And I'm from Chicago, too. I have been senior pastor of Canaan Community Church in the Inglewood neighborhood on the south side of Chicago for the last 14 years. And the interesting thing about it is, while I love being at Canaan, Canaan kind of came out of what God was doing through what David was explaining, with me coming back to my neighborhood kicking and screaming. because for me, that was the last thing on my mind and the last plan I had for myself. And it's been that journey that has shaped me, shaped the congregation I lead, and I believe has begun to shape our neighborhood. And not just my journey, lots of journeys, but lots of people who share that kind of ethos of desiring to either return or remain in the neighborhoods in which most people are trying to escape from. So along with being the pastor of Canaan, I got like 4 jobs because I'm a bivocational pastor. Canaan's never been able to pay me a salary since I've been there for the 14 years. So I did everything from teach elementary school to work for a non-for-profit as a city director. So now I'm working part-time for Trinity Christian College in partnership with Northern Seminary, leading a dual degree program that they have together. So, yeah, lots of full stuff. And I just wrote this great book.
Yeah, Pastor Jay.
Shameless promotion. Published by InterVarsity Press. I have not been to their table to see if it's there, but let's pray that it is. Called Church Forsaken, Practicing Presence in Neglected Neighborhoods. And the book, while it takes on kind of a narrative sense and telling my story and all those things, my goal, because I get it everywhere I go speak, is people say, man, your story is amazing. Like, that is so great. You took this church that was a traditional Black Baptist church and took it on this journey to be a community, non-denominational church, doing all this. It's funky. How did you do that, right? And I don't usually have answers for them because most of it has just been the work of the Spirit, loving people well, and just trusting God. Because when you don't know what you're doing, God usually can use you a little bit better. Amen. But what I've endeavored to do with this book, and I'm saying this so that I can kind of set up the 7 principles, is I wanted to name the actual things that we as the church have decided we're not going to do. Like, we've just told God, I know that you love these things. I know that you love these people. I know that you love these places. But we as the church, we got something else we're doing. Yeah. And so I come from a quote that I heard for the first time when I was actually overseas. And it's by Dr. Jon Fuller. It just simply says this: there are no God-forsaken places, just church-forsaken. Right? It's just... And he was talking about a global context, and it made so much sense as he's talking about missionaries. But I was like, that is my neighborhood. We got 381 churches in my one neighborhood. And it has the highest crime index, poverty index, all the things you can think of, with the most local churches. And then all week long, those churches have gates and bars and locks on them. And then they come open up on Sunday morning and close back up. And I'm like, God is here. Where's the church? And so what I attempt to do with this book is to frame that conversation of what are the things that the church has forsaken? And then the tagline, practicing presence in neglected neighborhoods. What are the practices that we need to do to combat the kind of the ramifications of us forsaking people, places, and activities that God has called us to do? So you'll hear a church forsaken position, practice, whatever, and then you'll hear, and here's what I think we should do about it, based off of kind of what God has done in my life. And from each one of those, I'll try to give a good little intro, and then the goal here, as our moderator stated, was for him to ask a question or to lead us through, like, talking about in our own context, in our own lives, how this thing played out. Okay? That's what we're doing. All right? One more shameless plug for myself, just because I don't know how long I'm gonna have a mic. I am also going to go more in depth with this for another workshop tomorrow and Saturday. So if you would like to hear more about specifically in my context and get into the nuts and bolts of the book, we'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow and Saturday. Today we want to share the stage with people who are practicing this thing out. Okay? All right.
Go right in. First.
So this is I'm a good black preacher, so I alliterate stuff. So that's just the way it goes. Yeah, that's the anointing. You're right. Thank you, Erin. Bless you. Shanda. The first one I call the church forsaken position. I narrate this through the text of Jeremiah 29:7-11. And I talk about the church forsaken position. Position is all about where we decide that we're going to actually be. And if we have forsaken the position that God wants us to be in, then my answer to that is to reside where you don't want to be. And I define exile in Jeremiah 29, not with some great theological description and definition, but simply as the place you don't want to be. Because I don't want you to walk out of here thinking that only our neighborhoods are forsaken. It's not the truth. Every neighborhood is forsaken for one reason or another. Maybe you forsaken one because you think everybody got it together. They don't need much help. We need to go to those inner city places and help those poor people. Good thing our neighborhood is great. There's no drug use behind those big houses and valences. There's no family structures falling apart because people are overworked and stuff. Anyway, that's just another sermon. So you have to reside where you don't want to be. And that means something totally different for everyone in this room. But the question becomes, how do you not forsake the place where God wants you? Because Jeremiah 29:4 says, to the exiles whom I have sent into exile. The question is, do we believe that we choose our place or do we believe we're sent? And if we're sent, do you really believe God's plan is to send you to the most comfortable place as possible? Is that the God that you worship? And if so, maybe we need to rethink our definition of who God is. So I want to start off with that, David. That's the first one, the church forsaken position. Reside where you don't want to be. And however you want to frame that thing, go for it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think similar to Brooks, when maybe about 15, 17 years, I'm starting to lose track of time, but so a group of friends of mine were really involved in urban ministry, and they moved to this neighborhood. They were majority white and some Asian folks, and they moved to this poor black neighborhood, and they were doing community development. I was the music director, worship director at their church, and they were like, my wife and I, we weren't married yet, but we were probably engaged, and they were like, hey, y'all should move into this neighborhood. And I was like, nah, we ain't trying to be about that life. And God was like, oh, you don't want to live with poor black people? And it was like, I was just playing God. Yeah, and so what ended up happening, I kind of got called out on some of these assumptions. And I mean, it wasn't necessarily a place I didn't want to be, but it was like a place that I was just so shaped by the American dream and the false narrative of the empire and climbing the ladder. And so it's been the most richest and rewarding thing that I've participated, been a part of. Like Ray, Makeda, Erin, like we're neighbors, and like we see each other all the time. And we live together, we worship together, we play together, we do ministry together, and we cry together, we laugh together. We do a lot of laughing together. And we're with each other in some of our most vulnerable times. And then you also have our neighbors who were just in that space. And so I realized that much of my life was set up in a way where, when Jesus tells a story about the Good Samaritan and asks, who's your neighbor? And you go and he talks about the guy that was on the Jericho Road. Well, you had to walk by the person on the Jericho Road. But the way our cities are set up, if you got enough money, resources, and connection, they built a highway and byways to bypass everybody down out on the Jericho Road. And so it's really forever shaped my faith and spirituality in ways that I don't know if I'd be even as comfortable living in a similar space, because it's been really key to my formation. Go ahead, Erin.
I just want us to think a little bit about the power of place. I think from the beginning of the record we have, God's people have always just been in a place. Like Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden. That was the place where God set them. That's where the place of God's presence was. And even as like the story goes on, the people of God, even when they were in Egypt, they were promised a place. There was a place of promise. And when they were in that place of promise, even when sojourners and strangers came to that place, it was supposed to be a place of refuge for them, a place where they can find rest for their weariness. And even Jesus came from heaven to earth to this place where his people were. And I think that when the people of God really put their feet on the ground in a particular place, we can see the kingdom really break through. I think we have to get church out of like, or something about church is this just like meta physical type of thing. I mean, it is kind of a meta thing, but it also is like God has placed me here in this place so that the kingdom can break through me for this people, for these places. So I think as we're considering like, you know, where does God want me to be? Like, look where God has you. And don't always look for what's the next best place. Where can I be like the savior, or where can I reach the lost? Like, look where God has you now. Put your feet to the ground where God has you now and see how the kingdom can be breaking through. Because when the people of God are on one accord in a place, power falls and the people around them are changed. So that's it. Just be mindful of place.
Place has also always just been a really interesting thing for me. I just have never felt like God has ever called me to a comfortable place. And instead of letting that be like a source of bitterness, I think it has become a place of healing for me. So I'm a PK. So the last thing I wanted to do was serve in a church. And, you know, even when I got over that, I was like, okay, God, so then now let's go to like all the places like around the world, or like even let me go back to my community. And God was like, no, I'm going to put you in the most affluent city with the most powerful people, and you're going to lead those people in worship. And I was like, okay, well, I don't want to help those people who oppress my people get forgiveness and seek it. And he was like, well, that's cool, but that's not that's not what we're doing. And so I also believe that even in obedience to a place, whether it was what I thought it would be or what I wanted it to be, God has often taken me back to the places of my deepest woundedness. So for me as a child, rejection from the church, he's taken me back to those places of deep woundedness so that I could not only help others, you know, draw closer, but find my own healing from that process. So, yeah.
It's good. Good. I said number 2.
So those stories are examples of, like, I think why God, you know, tells us to reside, right? Like when you think about the story of Israel in exile, Israel has made some poor decisions around idol worship, and God is banishing them to exile, right? You want to be idol worshipers, I'll send you to the land of idols. You can have idol palooza, go for it, right? Like, you want idols, I got plenty for you. But here's the thing, like, he doesn't just ban them there and tell them that you got to stay there, like reside. Then he crazily says, build houses and live in them. That's crazy to me, because I'm like, if this is the place, I'm like, this is temporary, God. As a matter of fact, in verses 9 and 10 of Jeremiah 29, which we rarely read, we skip from 7 and go all the way to 11. We skip over it because it says, the diviners and the prophets that are telling you that it's only going to be a short visit here and a short stay in exile, do not believe them. I did not send them. It is a lie that they are telling you. I will not come and get you until I'm ready to come get you, at least after the 70 years I've done. Then I'll talk about returning you back to your place that you want to go. Then he says, plus, I know the plans I have for you. But we never talk about that, right? Like, that's what I was saying, David, when you were saying I believed what the society told me. That's it. The diviners and the prophets that are lying to us. And we fell for a hook, line, and sinker, even as people of God. And that's why it's important that we have the Jeremiahs in our life that will be the one prophet that will tell the truth. That will say, no, if God sent you there, then it's not enough just to reside there. The second church-forsaken thing is not just the church-forsaken position, but it's the church-forsaken process. Return to previously forsaken places. Now, I use that language very intentionally because most of the forsaken places that we have in our communities were not always like that. They were forsaken before. And now we're dealing with the ramifications of those. My neighborhood between the early 1900s all the way up to 1960 was a majority Swedish neighborhood and Dutch neighborhood with tons of Christian Reformed churches in it. And by 1970, It was an all African American community, right, with lots of Black Baptist, Church of God in Christ, and Pentecostal churches. But there's a story behind that that talks about the fact that when people build a house, it's not enough just to have a house. The second command is to live in it. Eugene Peterson, he goes ahead and translates, says, build houses and settle down. Right? Like, root yourself. Be present. Be a part of the place where you are. It's not enough just to have a house. This is my number one problem with people who get a hold of stuff that happens in Christian community development, especially, and want to move or want to be a part. Building a house is one thing. Living in it is another. Because what it assumes is that I'm not sending you to Babylon to make it your own personal version of Jerusalem. Right? So when you move into the neighborhood where they like to play that music really loud, late at night, right? And you're, please, I'm having trouble sleeping. Can you please go to this house next door and have them shut the music off? Not recognizing the history of the community and its relationship to the police and what will happen when they go into that house just to ask them to cut down music, right? Because, and you're thinking, well, I have a house here too. You don't live in it. You have not become a part of the place, because becoming a part of the place says, I got to suck it up and maybe get a relationship with these folks next door and ask them, can I come to the party? Because until they know who I am, they're not going to shut anything off from me. Those are the type of things I'm talking about. And I learned that the hard way, because I moved back in my neighborhood thinking I was better than everybody there, even though I was from there. And God had to smack me all in my face with that and say, dude, who do you think you are? This neighborhood is not going to be better because you moved in. I've been here. And the good people of God have already been here. As a matter of fact, if you would move in here, you'll find out you'll probably do more changing than the place. So the return to previously forsaken places, the church forsaken process, is the second point.
Good. Man, anybody? Okay, go ahead, Terence.
I just want to go back to the first one, because for about 13 years I lived on the west side of Chicago, and recently 2 years ago we moved to the suburbs. So we did like reversal, right? But it was more for my wife's job, and so I did not want to be. Jay knows this. I did not want to be in the Evanston Skokie area. I didn't want to be there. I'm like, no, I want to be on the west side. But what I've learned in the last 2 years is, again, Christian community development in this new area, right, where my neighbors don't look like me. They have different faith background than me, but we've been able to learn Christian community a little differently, to the point where I remember, which was so cool, quick story. So we had our Black Lives Matter sign in our front yard. And we pretty much was almost all white neighborhood. And so one day, a man pulled in front of our house, and my daughter, who's 9, she thought it was, Amazon. They get out real fast. She thought it was an Amazon driver dropping off a package or something. And so a guy gets out the car real fast and takes our sign and just goes, right?
Oh, wow.
And so we're like, yo. And so my wife, she's like, hey, what should we do? I was like, we should call the police. So we called the police, and they actually did a full investigation of everything. It was crazy. I'm like, wow, this is what y'all do in the suburbs? Okay, cool. So they went to the neighbor's house. They went to multiple neighbors' house, and we were learning our neighbors. How you doing? And one particular lady, old white lady across the street, Miss Jane, she found out, and she was like, what? They did what? That is terrible, right? And we're like, yeah, it is. And so the next day we roll up to our house. Miss Jane has a Black Lives Matter sign in her yard. And we get out the car, we're like, hey, how you doing? And she's like, what, if they want to steal my sign, they're going to have to get through my dog and all this. I was like, yo. And so we're learning community in a different way, because most of my neighbors, they enter into their garage, and I don't see them, especially in the wintertime. I don't see them. But it's so I'm learning community on a different level. I have 2 neighbors. One neighbor to my left, they're from Bosnia, and they're Muslim, and they are like the dopest people I've ever met, right? And so I'm learning community on a different level, and God's teaching me some things too, a place where I didn't want to be. And they found that I'm a pastor, so it's now they're like, what? Like, you don't fit the typical pastor mode, right? And so, but we were seeing some interesting things that God is doing, even when I was like, I don't want to be here, and I don't know how long we're going to be in the suburb, but for now, we're here and we're trying to build community. So I just wanted to mention
Good,
that.
that's good. Any folks on like kind of point two? Oh, in the microphone. Oh.
I was just saying that like I think the premise behind this church for second process is the notion of, yes, living. Like Terence's story is about now returning, right? Like it's now like this is not just a place where I have a house, but I know Miss Jane. I know my neighbors over here from Bosnia. I'm becoming a part. And now the question becomes, how does that impact me and my daughters? How does that impact the way that I live moving forward? And also, what does it look like to say that my neighborhood is actually forming me versus me coming in and transforming it? So.
Well, I mean, I think one thing, and I give y'all a little bit more time to think through some stuff, but when Joy and I, my wife and I moved to this neighborhood, we kind of had this like kind of vision of being somewhere for like 40 years and kind of like evaluating every 10 years. And so around 2018, that was kind of our benchmark when we bought the house, moved to the neighborhood. And man, it was a very hard evaluation period of time. A lot of what happened was, I kind of realized, I guess when I kind of came in, a lot of my friends, I'm like, a few things. I think being in spaces like this, you got to be really intentional about, as a African American, keeping black friends, and so like having like my college friends, we were all in the same city. I went to school in that city, and then they end up going to Philly and Puerto Rico and just Nashville, live all around New York, live all around the country. And so, then I'm like left, and I got majority white friends that I'm like we're walking together and getting some distance. It just takes time to get distance, and just time and journey and a friendship. And so then Brooks and I, we were like friends because there's an affinity that we have, and we really are intentional about at least trying to get together in the same physical spots at least 2-3 times a year. And so, but I ended up finding like a lot of my friends who are like my age, like black men who are in the similar space, end up being like around the country. And so here we are. I mean, I'm just stuck with like white friends, and so, and so here it is, we doing this thing. And so I'm thinking like, okay, we all doing the same thing. But then I realized y'all cats be going to the beach house for the beach house on the weekends, and I ain't never get no invitation to the beach house. And it's like, there ends up being this like socioeconomic space, or your family takes you on vacation to Italy or whatever the case may be, and we're all in this hood doing this hard work and dealing with the level of heartbreak and all that kind of stuff, but we don't get the opportunity to kind of like get in and out. Now, when I'm out working. I'm talking my butt off. I'm like, I'm this jank doing 5 workshops for CICW, like what I'm saying, it ain't like vacation, and over 10 years, it gets to 10 years, and folks are like, man, I'm tired. I'm like, you tired? You the one that been taking like vacations, take a nap and get back at work, you know what I mean? But it ended up being this like thing that I actually like a lot of folks, like this gentrification, like one of the things that we gotta own, and we have owned as like part of the conversation, like our church has been a part of the acceleration of the gentrification process because people really aren't living in the community. Like they kind of like are coming in, bringing their culture, changing the furniture around, investing in kind of businesses. And, there are a few that are trying to understand the economic side of things and trying to do some stuff. But for the most part, like culturally, that is a part of the narrative, And I think in 2018, we really had to have some like come to Jesus conversations that were very hard and difficult. And for us, when you're kind of like committed to being in a place for a long period of time, you can get some things right over 10 years. You get some things wrong over 10 years. And so we're like, all right, hey, how do we make a correction course for the next 10 years? And that's kind of what the conversation about our church has been. And we really talk about economics in a totally different way than we did going into it 10, 15 years ago. You about to say something, Erin?
Yeah, I was about to tell our business a little bit more. Like, I think that Do y'all remember when Miley Cyrus was, I don't know what she was doing. She was like rapping and stuff. And like, do you remember like, and people were upset with her because she put on hip hop culture, and then when she got tired of it, she took it off like it was last season's like rain jacket. And I think that when people move into certain places to do ministry, like there are some people who move in and they're like, listen, I'm just going to cast off everything and I'm going to be invested here to live life for the people. But then there are others who try, like Pastor Jay said, to make it like Jerusalem, and they can just put on this thing or take it off with no thought. And I think especially for persons of color who are doing the work, like me and David, who have both moved into our gentrifying neighborhood, like we're in there. Like we don't have no other option. Like we got mortgages and that's it. Like we are in there. We have no parents that are like supplementing our income. There's no safety net. Either we work and get these checks and pay our bills, or we have nothing. But we're still doing that hard spiritual work of reconciliation and serving, and being present in a place where we didn't grow up. And I think that if our brothers and sisters who do have more option and do have more resources could see that would ease the load for people like me and David, because we're carrying an unequal burden. And we often are carrying an unequal burden in life in general anyway. So yeah, I think it just is very challenging. I think at our church specifically, to tell it all, people will look at our churches and our leaders and say, well, some of y'all pastors got the biggest houses in the neighborhood, biggest, most wealthy, expansive houses with like, outdoor living rooms, and you live in the middle. There's a trap house across the street. Like that does not, what does that say about the kingdom of God? Should I be attaining to this? If I'm a Christian, I should have this, or only like good people have these? And it speaks volumes. So when Pastor Jay is saying, like, actually, when you build the house, live in it, it requires sacrifice and death to yourself, financial, economic, like social, relational capital. You're going to have to sacrifice all of that. You can't keep everything the same and live this life of sacrifice.
I want to tell a story about a friend of mine. Her name is Elena. She's actually, if you're familiar with Erebon, what's her title? It's something big. She right under David. If he's president, she's like, right.
She was director of training.
There you go, director of training. Anyway, she's awesome. She's a white lady, and she moved into Church Hill. So this is our neighborhood, right? And so one thing, there's another couple that I know that are just buying a house. And so for people who have committed to process and making Church Hill a home, they decided to move into a block where everybody owned their homes, not where people are renting, so that the house that they bought, the people that originally were in this neighborhood own their homes on that block. So like an intentionality of where they even bought the house. And so Elena, she's probably like this tall, maybe. She's a smaller lady. And she has chosen to garden, but she gardens in her front yard as opposed to her backyard. And so when she goes out to her garden, she speaks to her very, very interesting neighbor on the right, who just is all in her business, but she continues to speak to him. She shares her cabbages and whatever you build in gardens, with her neighbors, and they have like conversations about that. There's this guy, I think his name is Kenny, right? He in the neighborhood, and he gonna hustle you to cut your grass, okay? He cut it yesterday, he coming again to cut your grass, and he want $40 for it, just like he did yesterday. Like it rained the day before, he coming to cut your grass. Like that's just what it is. And he's very, very good at hustling the white people in the neighborhood because of the white guilt. So he's like, hey, let me cut your grass real quick. And they're like, oh man, and Elena has done this great, she does not let it become something that guilts her. What she'll do is she'll say, I'm not gonna do it today, but I got you next week. We have a schedule. And she'll remind him of the schedule, but she stays true to her schedule, right? And then at the Robinson Theater, it's where Jackie Robinson, he was a famous tap dancer. Jackie Robinson's a baseball player. Bill Bojangles Robinson, right? So there's a theater in the community. Great. Clearly I have made a home there, okay? So there's a community theater there, but they do classes every every evening during the week. They do Zumba, they do workout classes, all this stuff. And Elena has decided she has a membership there. And that's where she does the Zumba with 70-year-old Mildred and 60-year-old, lady. And so like she's made this. Does that make sense? So there are ways that she could get out. She has a car. She can drive to a different suburb that's right around the corner, but she is invested in how she is neighboring and where she decides to neighbor. And I just think that that's a really practical example of what you can do.
Yeah. Let me just add like another kind of concept, just as y'all think about these things, because I think these are illustrations of like maybe imagination, what you can do in your community. But so on the economic side of it, you think like there were two white pastors. We're doing a racial reconciliation thing. And this is just the narrative. These things are very complex. All these folks are friends of mine. We've been part of this stuff. I'm just explaining the complexity of living this way, and not even making judgment statements on things. And so, but the one of the co-founding pastors, a white guy, Ivy League education, the opportunities, all the things. He comes into the hood, and so one of the things that happens is, when white people move into the hood and they relocate, there are other white people that make sure that they're okay. They're just like, oh man, you did the second most dangerous thing to do. You didn't go to Africa, now you're in the hood, so it's like, I gotta make sure you're straight. And so he ends up kind of out of the house, and then his family expands, and he gets help to make their house kind of bigger. And then our second pastor that kind of replaced him just so happened to be a white guy. His wife's an executive, and so they just have different resources, but they actually end up buying a house. And so like the biggest block in the neighborhood, biggest house on the block is the two white pastors of the church. And so then this kind of goes back to one of the other young men who is like down the street. We've had a home ownership program. And so in this home ownership program, they were like one of the first families. I mean, like, I know it's hard. These guys are like actually 20-something-year-old men now, but I know them as kids. I know them as like kids. I know their mom, and I know their story and a lot of the challenges. But we actually kind of help. I was on one of the work teams to kind of help get that house together. The house is a little bit smaller house on the block. And so they grow up and they're able to, if it wasn't for the church, if it wasn't for like the Christian tutoring programs, if it wasn't for the home ownership stuff, it was from network, him being able to go to college it wouldn't have been possible. Like the stability that he's had, the ways that we've intervened and been a part of their family's life, that wouldn't have been possible. So fast forward, he's 20-something years old, and you do what you do when you're 18, 19 years old. You kind of leave and kind of start to cleave, right? And so you go through a bit of kind of like deconstruction of where you came from and thinking about certain things. And he goes to a liberal arts college up in New York, and he wants to study Black Marxism. And so he's looking at studying Black Marxism, and one of the folks that he's been walking with him since he was a teenager in his like discipleship relationship, a white guy who is into economic development. And, he's a friend of mine, and he's just like, oh man, this kid's like angry with white people, and we've been so helpful. And it's almost like he should be thankful because of what we've done. And then it's kind of like, and why is he into Marxism and like all this kind of like deconstruction and all this kind of stuff, and like this isn't Christian, and like and why isn't he? And he's trying, and I'm like, well, first of all, why can't he have the same kind of freedom? Like, you're literally here because of the deconstruction you did in your suburban life. Mm-hmm. So why can't he have the same kind of experience that all of us have had in this way, but he needs to be forever thankful for the things that's kind of going on? Like we need to question that. But then also think about the kind of good news that we've been sharing and embodying, where it's like we're doing a type of discipleship where he'll never have access to this $300,000, $400,000 house. And so Black Marxism, it's interesting that it's Black Marxism, not even like regular European Marxism. It's Black Marxism, and he's like trying to find some good news in that context. And so I think like what it was too often, we aren't like thinking through like the philosophies and theologies that are being shaped by the way that we're embodying or not embodying the gospel. And so, like that was part of the conversations that we've had, and we're trying to like live into a different thing. So this emerged to another conversation of like, do we give money so that we can give tax deductions, or are we going to really be spiritual family? And whether we get the tax deduction or not, how do we really look out for one another in ways that get us to this new space? And so, I mean, that's like kind of the new chapter that's still to be unfolded, but I do see us kind of moving towards in that direction. So that's just a little bit of put flesh on in progress stories. Let's go to number 3.
You guys really were just moving us straight towards with Makeda's story and with your conversation there, because the third point literally is all about this idea of moving beyond just building houses, because the very next verse in Jeremiah 29 tells you then to plant gardens and eat what they produce. And I tell people all the time that context, that even understanding it makes sense to me in my neighborhood, because I was hearing the scripture telling me this place in exile that I'm in, that I resided in and returned to, that it's supposed to be the place that's taking care of me and feeding me and where I'm getting my sustenance from and all these different things. And I was going, man, every store around here only sell flaming hot Cheetos with, that's really good, with nachos and meat. Meat and nacho cheese on top, and those little hug juices that don't have no real juice in them. It's just food coloring, water, acid, and sugar. So I was like, eating what's produced here didn't make much sense, but it was God reminded me that He said plant gardens and eat what they produce. That was really challenging me, because that meant that I had to not only be a consumer in the place where God had me, but I was not supposed to be producing. And so that changed the narrative of, do I just get in my car and drive to Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, whatever your store is, and get the things that are healthy, or do I need to be a part of the production of what's happening in my neighborhood? And what I say is that literally it's the church forsaken plan. God always had the idea that the people of God would be an intimate part of what was going on in their community. Like that was never, she told us that people have always been placed. Right? He put Adam and Eve in the garden and said, tend to it. Right? No, just live there. Right? And so they were always growing their own food. After sin enters, now it's hard to do it. But you were always responsible. And so the question becomes, if that's the church forsaken plan, what is the plan? And all of us would agree with the statement, but it's easy to agree with the statement in theory. It's another thing to agree with it in practice. And that's to reconnect to the whole gospel. And the fact that God is just as concerned with what you eat, how you spend your money, right? Like all of those things, as God is with your eternal soul's resting place. And if you can recognize that, then the people of God now recognize that planting gardens and eating what they produce is not just about having good food. It's literally saying, I now have to learn the place I'm in. Israel had never farmed in Babylon. They had no understanding of what it meant to produce food outside of where they were. Now they have to lean on the Babylonians. These are things that you start to recognize when you look at this thing in a real narrative way. Who are the Babylonian farmers and folks who are experts in how to grow here? What things grow here, right? And so now it's not just about whether or not how God loves us and whether all these things. It's also about like how we live in the space and reconnect to the entirety of it. So she was already talking about the garden in the front, and you sharing about thinking about gentrification, all the things that we do. This is what I mean by reconnecting to the whole gospel, rather than just focusing on souls.
Say something. I think one of the hardest things for me, especially in DC, growing up in the hood, I was like, God, they don't need any more garden. Like, what do they actually need? They have 4, 5, 6, 7 times as much money as me. What would I actually plant? And so it really was humbling for me to then make the decision to open up my heart to the very people who hurt me, to even decide to figure out or pray about what their needs actually were. And for me in my context, it really was that the same way that I felt like as a Black woman, my body or my talents have been monetized or abused, they felt the same way. Because in DC, there is no rest. You work and you're owned based off of what you can do and what you can build and how smart you are. And so the same way I felt like my talents were exploited, I realized that my congregation felt the same way. And then also the same depression and anxiety that I experienced from that, they were also experiencing. And so that shifted my worship, because I'm like, oh, now I know what to go after. Now I know what to pray for. And I know that for me, one of the most healing experiences that I had creatively was in the songwriting internship with Erin. And so I was all mad at God because I was in DC and all my friends were at the same church in Richmond. And he had me over here. And God was like, well, you should try to build here what was life-giving to you there. And I realized that amongst the politicians and the doctors and the lawyers, there were creatives who just were desperately searching for affirmation of their identity in Christ through just natural expression, not something that they had to scrape the ground for or prove in the courtroom or, in the White House, but just natural expression that could be affirmed. And so then I began to cultivate and create creative spaces. And then even if I, thought some of the poems or stories or liturgy was whack, I'd be like, this is awesome. Keep going, keep expressing. And knowing that we were watering each other and cultivating and growing something that was creating a space of healing for us outside of our everyday. So that was, for me, my experience.
Again, I'm having the opposite experience, of living in the hood for, almost 13 years and coming to a suburb. And so I talked about Miss Jane earlier. She gardens, and my neighbor to the right, Miss Vivian, she gardens. So talking about gardening, we didn't garden, so growing up. But Miss Jane, she believes that the soil is not actually good soil, so she gardens on top of the soil, on the ground. Actually, she doesn't have a yard because she says you don't need a yard with grass. You need to have a yard to plant vegetables. But one of the things that's so cool is that my kids are like, Dad, we need to do some gardening. And I'm like, no, and they're like making me garden, right? Which is cool. And I'm not used to having people come to my house and give like, hey, we made you cookies, right? This whole like concept, like what is going on? And going to festivals like in the neighborhood, I'm like, that's gonna be whack. I'm not trying to go here, be the only brother here and eat this nasty food, right? But what's been cool is that I've got out of my comfort zone and I've done those things, right? And I've gone to the festivals and again, I'm learning this community development, right, from a different perspective, right? And it's been rich. So the verse that Jay read earlier is coming to life, right? Plant gardens, be here, right? And enjoy this community that God has placed you in for however long you're going to be in. And so I'm unlearning and relearning a lot of different things about what is community. And who are my neighbors and how to love this, how to love my neighborhood and be a part of my neighborhood. If they have a festival, if they have something about food, whatever, the light festival, be a part of that, and be present. And so I'm learning from a different perspective, which has really been cool. And God's like, no, this is your neighborhood. Represent your neighborhood. And I'm like, okay. But my children and my wife is helping me doing that process of like, we need to start doing what Miss Jane's doing, Miss Vivian's doing, right? And that's really been fulfilling for me.
Yeah, I was thinking about, I really like how you talked about like the kind of culture making aspect of, like kind of planting gardens and eat what you consume with that, right? Because I think oftentimes when it comes to culture, particularly as Christians, we can be consumers and not producers of culture. And I think like one of the beautiful things about what we do in Urban Doxology, like the songwriting internship, it's not a whole lot of things in our community that everybody feels like it's theirs. Like there's the white restaurants, there's the black, we don't really have black restaurants, but the black places where you kind of go and get food. Do we have any black restaurants? Yeah, none of that. You don't have any black restaurants. We got a lot of coffee shops and free range grass bicycles stuff. Like, I mean, all the kind of like white people stuff. There's a lot of that. And then there's like black spaces. And the theater that we actually, like, it's really interesting. The third spaces in our community are actually spaces that Christians created. So I said 1/3 space is where it's kind of both kind of black, white, rich, poor, is the Robinson Theater. There were 2 Christian business folks that just felt like God told them to renovate this theater. And we were meeting in a church. I mean, we were meeting in a school. And right at the time they finished renovating this building and did the historical stuff to it and said, hey, this is going to be a community center. It was a third space, and that became the place, like, right central in the community to both have, I mean, like, everybody feels like it's their community space. And then there's a coffee shop that's a workforce development space that it's very diverse. I mean, you see black folks in there, you see people from the neighborhood, you see poor folks, wealthy folks. One of the richest guys in the city, you'll see him have meetings in there. And so I think that's the type of stuff that you really need to be in, not only just as it relates to food, but culture, business, economics, things of that nature. Go ahead, next, 4th one, right?
So I'm actually going to kind of combine the 4th and 5th one together. Not because I have to, but I just think they go well together. The 4th one is my favorite in the book. It is the church forsaken place. It is reestablish the value of place. And it comes from the next verse in Jeremiah 29 where it talks about take wives, get married, have daughters, have sons, marry off your sons and daughters. But my favorite part of that verse is multiply there and do not decrease. There's an expectation on God's behalf of Israel in exile that they will multiply there. That it won't just be the place where those who are banned now build a house and live in it, but your children and your grandchildren, because I'm not coming for at least 70 years, are also responsible to fall in love with that place. There is an expectation of generational love for the place in which I've sent you into exile. And it has implications for how we raise our children, not just our children, but all the children in the community. How do we fight against narratives of escapism that they may own, or incomplete narratives that say that this place is great and that place over there is bad? We have to raise our children differently if we're actually going to multiply there and do not decrease. There's implications for that. And then the next one is church forsaken people. And that's just remembering the poor and marginalized. And the reason why I felt like those go together is because when you talk about the places we're in, we have these notions that they're poor and marginalized in some places, but not in every place. And the expectation of God is that every place has people who are on the outskirts of society, who don't feel connected, don't feel like their identities are valued. And so he says, seek the peace and welfare of the city where I've sent you into exile. Seek the shalom of wherever I've put you. That means every person, every place, every business, every government official, all the police officers, the teachers, like the entirety of the place. And that becomes like, we'll never ever be tired. Like if your church is looking for stuff to do, then you haven't decided that you're going to really reconnect or really reestablish the value of place and really remember the poor and marginalized. I use remember. Anybody ever heard Timothy Dearborn talk about the remembering of the body of Christ? Right? It's not this mental remembering. It's we're a body and we left our hand over there and our feet over there and our shoulders back there. And God's saying, you're not the body of Christ without everyone coming together. And it's a literal remembering the poor and marginalized, bringing them back into the fold of the church through our recognizing that we're the ones who pushed them away. So that's what I mean by that. So those are the two. It is reestablishing the value of place and remembering the poor and marginalized.
Yes. So there's just definitely work that needs to be done. And it almost feels like sometimes it's overwhelming. But when you think about the call and even though these are hard concepts, if you think about family and you don't think about your neighbor if you think about your neighbor being like a family member, you got your brothers and sisters that are a little bit closer, you got your cousins, but you're all still family, so you want the good of your family. So to just really invest in communities and build it up and making sure people don't feel like the other, whether you know them or not, but to treat them like even if they're not as close, but they're still a type, something that connects you. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Two things that our church does and did. One, we do community prayer every once a month. And that's something where the mic is open, similar to testimony service, if anyone's familiar with that. But the mic is open for anyone who would like to share what's been going on in their lives or something that they would like to be prayed for. And because we're at the community center, people often just walk in off of the street. So Erin, as Erin said earlier, there are different levels of inebriation, so things could be strange. But there's absolutely no shame culture in the space, and anything and everything everyone says is valid, and we pray for and over them. If they have an issue that they would like to pray for themselves for, the person moderating will lay hands and they can pray, or we as a church body will pray for them. And it's just a time that we can hear from our community. Also, another thing that we used to do that was really cool is we used to have a family dinner after service. So our service is at 4:00 p.m. And so after service at around 6, we'd roll out a whole bunch of big circle tables, and we had food. And there was a lady who just gave of the goodness of her heart and made dinner for maybe 100 or so people, and folks will come in off of the street as well. But it was part of our service. It was an extension of service that we would stay and sit and eat. And so those are just two things that were really practical of seeing the people. And a lot of times food is a way that you just connect to people as relationally and not ignoring the differences, right? So
I would also say when we think about the poor and marginalized, we often think about it in economic terms. But I think one thing that the church has to realize is that money is not the most valuable resource. So very many of us will be uncomfortable with people who are poor and be like, I have to help them, without realizing there's often ways that people who don't have a lot of economic resources are able to serve you, because their faith resources are vast and wide, because they've needed to depend on the Lord to meet their every single need. And James chapter 2 talks about it, if you don't believe me. I feel like if we understand that having faith in God and faith in God to provide is a more valuable resource than our money, we'd be a little bit more open with our resources and realize that giving away our money is not like giving away our identity or giving away our pride. It's just giving away something that God just gives us to steward anyway. So when we are in a place and we are serving people and we're thinking about the poor and the marginalized, remember that being poor and being on the margins looks different than we might think automatically.
I mean, one of the things that, and if you heard me talk before, you might have heard me tell the story. This is I can't make this up, true story. At one time, we had 2 Kevin Joneses in our church. One Kevin Jones was an economist that worked for the Federal Reserve. He had a wife and 2 sons, and they would sit wherever they wanted to sit in the congregation. And there was another Kevin Jones that experienced homelessness for the greater part of his adult life. And he would always stand in the back corner, and it was a very active part of our church. When we were going on church retreats, he would go. He, would come every Sunday and set up tables, and we do the meal together and ask about your family, and he just lived in a kind of outdoors and just a different kind of experience. And I noticed, I was like, oh, you know what? We got 2 Kevin Joneses in our church. I was like, why does this Kevin Jones sit wherever he wants to sit with his family, and the other Kevin Jones always stands in the back corner? And then the Spirit asked me the question, said, David, when you prepare worship, when you prepare sermons, which Kevin Jones are you preparing for? And I realized I'm preparing for the Kevin Jones that's just like me, who's the economist, even though he has white skin and white culture, we share this common educated culture, this common kind of middle class culture. And the one that's African American that was like in the back, we can't talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs or the Dow Jones or whatever middle class people talk about. I don't know what we talk about, but it's like that kind of stuff was really significant. So then it began to maybe ask another question of like, what does spiritual formation look like for people with diverse education and learning styles? And so one of the things ever since then I've done is like always center my preaching for whoever might be considered the least of these in our community. And it actually has really helped my communication to be way, way better. If you have if you communicate with people with PhDs, then you're only going to get a certain amount of population. But if you can communicate for the least educated, formally educated person in the room, then you really capture everybody. And I just think there's wisdom in God's narrative about prioritizing whoever the marginalized is within this space, and creating places of belonging. And so with our church, even though it's like, probably the largest minority population cumulatively is probably maybe 40%. So it's always been majority white. And there's been a deference to particularly like African American culture because of our context. But it's just a very, like, even like the meals that we share, which is when we do, is a very beautiful thing. It's just a power dynamic difference when you can you can choose to eat a meal or not eat a meal. When you're like really hungry, and that might be one of the best meals of the week for you, that's just a different thing where it'd be like, oh, I want this, I'll go to the restaurant. And so I think one of the things that's been really great is like we have a choir, and the choir, like Makeda is like an amazing choir director, and not just in general choirs in general with like people who sing really well, but she's like great with a community choir and making everybody sound really well. And so there's just people like, I'm a producer. I'm like the best person that could sing the solo gets the job. Makeda she doesn't do it that way. And she'll like work with people, and it really makes it a community thing. And it's some of the most beautiful aspects of worship. And there's like a person in the choir that like, just for various reasons can't hold a tune at all. But she's like, she has like, her point of being in the choir is not so she could sing, but so she could be part of the community of what's going on there. And it's kind of like, and they're able to find that way of kind of helping the center and be in that space. And so I think those are things that like, these stories, I don't care where you are, you got these situations in your church, like wherever you are. And I think these principles can really help you to be more effective as the church is present to these realities. Go ahead.
Yeah. One of the things I say in the book in kind of context of that is I talk about the upside down gospel, and I talk about the fact that the church has believed that in worship and in evangelism and all these ways that there's an even playing field. And Jesus shows us that to not be true by the way he interacts with the rich and the poor in Scripture. When you look at the same questions being asked or same desire between the woman with the issue of blood and then the rich young ruler, there are very different responses from the same person. The rich young ruler says, hey, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? Like, I just want to be whole. I want to be right. Jesus is like, you think you already know anyway, right? Then he offers him to follow him, but you got to leave everything. He's like, I can't do that. But when the woman with the issue of blood comes, she don't ask him anything. She just reach and touch the hem of the garment. He turns around and says, you already good, right? There's an expectation that the same thing is needed for both, but they're coming from different perspectives. They both, what Jesus desires is an utter dependence on him, right? In worship, right? So the woman comes and already has that. If I can just touch the hem of his garment, I know I'll be made whole. It's all about Jesus. The rich young ruler comes with, well, I got a whole bunch of things that I need to do, right? And Jesus says, no, actually don't do anything, just follow me. And he's like, well, I can't give up all this stuff. So they land in the same spot, an utter dependence on Jesus, period. But some people who have been marginalized, have been poor, that's all they've ever had is a dependence on Jesus. And Jesus elevates them. So that the people who thought that all their works, all of their money, all of their resources were going to like win their way in, he goes, you need to actually be like them. And that's why you also need to be like children, right? This utter dependence. And so I think there's a lot to learn from this remembering of the poor and marginalized. It's not for the sake of the marginalized. It's really for the sake of those who have been accepted by society and have fallen prey to the incomplete lies of the diviners and the prophets that have told you good, right? Second to last one, we almost there. We're going to open up for questions, I'm sure. One of my favorites, the church forsaken purpose, which is to remind one another of our collective power. I am a partnership guy. The second half of Jeremiah 29:7 says, after it says, seek the peace and welfare of the city where I sent you into exile, it says, pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare, you will find your welfare. Written into that is, if Babylon does better, y'all do better, because that's where you live now. So it's not about insulating yourself and trying to make your Israeli and understanding of yourself as God's people here in exile in Babylon grow in and of itself. It's the more Babylon excels and succeeds and flourishes, when you are really a part of Babylon, you too will flourish. So it's about the fact that they need to see Babylon flourish in order for themselves to flourish. And so this idea of our collective power has led my church to not do anything unless it's in partnership. Partnership with community organizations, partnership with elected officials, partnership with anybody who's willing to do something. We just want to join in and be a resource to you. And if there's something that our church as a whole desires they want to do, it can't be done unless we have a partner that's going to partner with us. And that has changed everything, because now we're no longer seeking the peace and welfare of Canaan Community Church. We're seeking the peace and welfare of the community in which God has placed Canaan Community Church. And it changes the way we live. And it's really changed the way our neighborhood has respected us, connected to us, and understands what the church's responsibility is when they see 381 of them every day. All right? So what does it look like to connect in a way that says, I can't do this on my own? Right? I need to be working along with someone. I need to be in community in order to fulfill God's plan for me.
I found that it's impossible to build self and community at the same time. So you really have to make a decision not to tend that way, because you will unknowingly destroy the things that you were just trying to build and cultivate. So it's really important to really believe that when you plant and sow and follow the Lord, that you and the entire community will be blessed. Even if you don't feel it for the first 6 months or a year or 4 years, you will indeed be better if you don't just focus on you and yours, but really the whole community. And even planting and sowing for people who don't even want to come to the garden. They will come and everyone will prosper.
Okay, so the church that I used to work at, which was a majority white church, and but in a neighborhood called Jackson Ward, which is another once thriving black town, but was desecrated by the building of the interstate, and so it's just a really poor neighborhood. But we met at this theater on a college campus, and it was hipster, and they had all these really cool graphics and things, and their slogan was for Richmond and empowering people towards a life-giving journey with Jesus. And they had a lot of really good ideas of what they thought would be good for the community, like backpacks for schools, which is a wonderful idea. If you talk to the schools, though, they often have backpacks left over from all the people that are giving backpacks. And if you talk to the schools, one thing that they need is funding for their PTA. And so they ended up actually giving funding for the PTA. But one thing that doesn't help the PTA run is if parents can't get to it because mom's working. And so she can't come to the PTA even though you funded it. And so there's this tension that you live in of, if you really talk to the community that you decided to be partnering with and the intricacies of what is actually needed. If you're going to fund the PTA, are you also going to go in their stead? Are you going to send your kids to the schools and then be a part of it? Are you going to start a babysitting club or whatever you might call it so that these parents can go to the PTA that you've just funded? Does that make sense? Are you, instead of fighting really hard for 90 backpacks to give these kids, how about you fight really hard for the reading program and go send your people to read with these kids because the reading apprehension is so low. And so there are things that we think as privileged people, and not a race thing, literally a privilege thing, that we're like, oh, I've got this cool thing that'll help you because you don't have any money. And that's not really what people need. And so I think to understand that to partner with people is not just to give money, but to partner with people is to actually build a relationship with the heads of schools. I don't know if everyone's community has like communities in schools for schools specifically, but talk to those people and very specifically build relationship with the kids and the parents and other community organizations like that.
Yeah, like education is like a big issue, particularly like in our area. And so some of the stuff that folks have done some people do send their kids to private school, but if they do, like we got a lot of folks who are who are coming out of incarceration and who like have, felonies and things of that nature. And you just have to have community in order for people to vouch for you, to advocate, to do stuff. And so some folks like who might send their kids to a classical Christian school, they will advocate or even bring in resources to try to like help people who would not be able to be into a private Christian school, classical school, to have poor parents. Children that have parents who are poor, that part of our community, to be in that education space. Then there's some who are like very privileged, economically privileged folks who. It was a group of them that said, hey, we're going to send our kids to the local public school. And it's unequivocally that the public schools in our neighborhood are very, very underperforming, under-resourced and very underperforming. And so one of the things they did was, instead of just trying to worry about the education for our kids, what they did was they created they raised about $500,000, used their network and their resources to raise $500,000 to make the Zone Public School a baccalaureate program. So it raised up the quality of the whole school as a whole, and they kind of have had a commitment to send their kids to public schools. Now they kind of the running jokes is that we're going to be written out the will from our family because they're like, why would you do that and not send your kids to the best opportunity and all that kind of activity? But it's like they're like, we just got a different value system. Like, Jesus came, and we're doing this because this is what we believe Christians, this is the way to operate in our Christian faith. And so I think this whole notion of like loving your neighbor as yourself, it looks different in different spaces, but like that, I think these are the type of things that folks are like kind of wrestling through and working out in different expressions. You hit the last one up?
Yep. So last one is called the Church Forsaken Perspective. And it is reorient our vision to see like God. It's one of my favorite to talk about. Reorient our vision to see like God. What am I saying? That's what Jeremiah 29:11 actually comes in. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans for what? For your good, right? Not your harm, right? Plans for you to have a future with a hope. That's a great verse when we put it on our graduation cards and wedding cards and encourage people with it and have it plastered all over our wedding day cakes and all that. It's great, but it's not such a great one when it's taken in the context of where they are and what God is saying to them. It's like, wait a minute, what you mean you looking for our good? This ain't good. Good would be back where God is with the temple in Jerusalem, chilling, doing the things we were doing. This is not good. Here's what I remind people. We have to reorient our vision to see like God, meaning that we have to recognize that God is not surprised by any place God places you. There's no place you can go, good, bad, indifferent, whether you would choose it or not, that God has not already not only created, but indwelled and been present there. So why does God have to remind us that he wants good for us? Because unless we get uncomfortable and reside where we don't want to be and return to the places we've forsaken and reconnect to the whole gospel, right? And just do all until we do that and actually get uncomfortable, God don't have to remind us that he's going to give us comfort. Because we're seeking it for ourselves. Right? It's crazy. Why does God have to remind Israel that I got plans for your good? Because they don't think so right now. They're actually obeying God and doing what they wouldn't choose to do. If we keep seeking comfort for ourselves, the easiest place to live, around the people that we like, doing the things that we know how to do, understanding things how we understood them, then we'll never need God to remind us that, don't worry, I got your back. I always tell you Christians that God never promised us comfort. He only promised us a comforter. That's it. The expectation is you'll be uncomfortable. That's why I'm sending you a comforter. Why would I send you a comforter so you could keep, what you need, double comfort? The comfort you seek and the comfort I give you? No, that's not the truth. And so the only way you can really do this is to be able to see the world the way God does. And I'm going to close with my little metaphor that I use to try to help people see the way God sees. And I'm a glasses wearer, so this is my number one way of explaining it to people. I believe that each and every one of us really walk through life with two pairs of lenses. Either that is the brokenness of humanity lenses or the glory of God glasses. That's what we wear. And me, I grew up in the inner city, and I was told my whole life that the suburbs was glorious, and that's where you're supposed to move when you've been in the inner city your whole life. So when I would go to the suburbs, right, so he's saying, when I would go to the suburbs, I would conveniently bring my glory of God glasses. And I would put them on, and I get to the suburbs, and I go, oh, it's so beautiful. Look, everybody's grass is the same height. How do they do that? Look at the beautiful houses with the white picket fences and the big two-car garages. I bet they're the perfect family. 2.5 kids and a dog. Oh, wait, shh, you hear that? It's so quiet here. Oh, the suburb, this is glorious. God, if only the rest of the world would be like this. God, help us to be glorious in this way. But then I have to go back home. And luckily, I always had in my back pocket my other lenses, my brokenness of humanity glasses. Those are the same ones they give you when you was a kid going on a missions trip. Everybody got to wear those. So you put those on and you get to the inner city or a rural place and you go, oh my God. Oh God. What? God. Oh my God, there's so much trash on the ground. God, why can't they pick up their own trash? God. Lord, there's just so many problems. I heard they don't have fathers in the homes. The schools are bad. Nobody wants to. Matter of fact, give me some face paint and a jump rope so I can play with these kids.
Call it out. Call it out.
God, it's so much problems. God, let your glory fall in this place. God, can we be a beacon of hope here? God, we just want to be a light. Look, man, let me tell you what you really need to do. You need to take both pair of those glasses, smash them up, put them together and make some bifocals. Pull a Benjamin Franklin. Because if you want to see the world the way God does, you must understand that every place and every person both displays the glory of God and the brokenness of humanity. If you can't see one or the other, it's not something wrong with the person or place, it's your lenses. And that is what God showed me. He showed me that I would walk into my neighborhood and I would ignore all of the beauty in it because I had on the wrong lenses. So my cry for every Christian every morning, the first thing you do before your feet hit the floor is reorient your vision to see like God. Put on your bifocals. I guarantee you, all of y'all look so glorious. You haven't, only a few people walked out on us. Y'all been really nice and quiet, right? But if I spend any amount of extended time with any one of you, I guarantee you your brokenness would ooze out. Eventually, both of us would see the things that we need to work on. That's the beauty of who we are. That's the world that we live in, a beautifully broken world. We have got to stop believing the lie that there are beautiful people and broken people, beautiful places and broken places. No, we must reorient our vision to see like God. God is not looking down from heaven telling Terence, now you moved to what I wanted it to look like. Evanston, that's glorious. That's what I was. If everyone would just move there across the street from the Black Lives Matter sign, everything would be great. It's not what God's saying. God can see all of the brokenness there. He also doesn't look at Inglewood and say, oh, why would anybody live there? That's just so broken. He's saying, look at the resilience of those people that were left there to die because no one cared, and how much they trusted in me, and were resiliently loving each other and their neighbors and taking care of one another. Y'all, the church forsaken perspective is huge. And if you can't remember none of the other ones, put on your bifocals every morning and see the world the way God does. That's what I call the church forsaken perspective.
That's good, bro.
Right?
Man, that bifocals that's my first time hearing that one. It's good, man. That's good, bro.
I've been looking through his bifocals, and one of the things too, I mean, I would always say when I lived in Lawndale, there was the beauty of the neighborhood, beauty of my neighbors. There was so much beauty. My parents were like, why are you there? And I'm like, man, the community, the relationships I've been able to develop, things that they wouldn't be able to see. But, moving to the suburbs, though, one of the things that there's a lot of unhappy people. And half of my block, I've realized this in the last year and a half, majority of my neighbors are divorced. And so there's a lot of unhappiness. There's a lot of things I'm like, oh wow, okay. And so I'm starting to see it a little differently. And there is a lot of issues, but it's looking at it from a different perspective. So God's kind of let me see the other side as well.
The bifocals metaphor also works in the way he just talked about it. The other thing bifocals do for you is if you can't read things from far away, it brings it closer to you. And if you can't see things close up and you need a distance, it pushes them away. I think that's also the way we have to do when we talk about people and places. His parents could not see what he saw because they were too far. He becomes a bifocals for them and says, you have to come closer and see the beauty here, right? And then when you've been living in a place for so long and you've only narrated it from one thing, sometimes you got to get some distance to be able to see. So now he's out in the suburbs and can remember all the beautiful things about Lawndale, right? So it goes both ways. It's the idea of seeing the beauty and the brokenness, but also recognizing that we have to get closer, and sometimes we got to get some distance if we really want to see the world the way God does.
Yeah, that's great. All right, we'll open up for questions. Any questions from anybody? Go ahead.
We're located on the corner of 55th and Paulina. So anybody that's ever been to Chicago, there's some major arteries. Chicago's on the grid. We're right off of Ashland Avenue, south of downtown, 5500 South. Ashland Avenue is like 1600 West. Chicago's a perfect grid, so you can never really get lost. Just keep paying attention to the signs. Okay, 16, 17, 18, right? But in the West Inglewood neighborhood, so we're on the far west end of the Inglewood neighborhood. We're in that gateway to Midway. We're right close to Midway Airport. Hope you come visit.
Go ahead. That's a good question.
Just to get us started, I think the Bible commands that we Sabbath, and I think honoring that is really, really important when you're doing spiritual work of any kind. When you're doing, and all of our work is spiritual work, but I think definitely making sure I try to make sure I'm very intentional with my Sabbath rest every week, and then every season as well. And then yearly Sabbath, which is like every week is one day, every season maybe a weekend, every year a week or 2 weeks or however it works out. And I think surrounding yourself with people who love you and know you and people that you know and love does an incredible amount of recreating you, because you need to be affirmed in the mission, and you need to be affirming other people to keep you going.
Okay, go ahead.
I also, for me, I had to. So Sabbath is huge. If you don't do it, then there's just no way. But also being selfish sometimes with community. So I know I mentioned affinity groups before, but me and my friend who were minority leaders at our church, we were just exhausted, and no lie, like Beyonce's Lemonade came out and we cried in our bedroom. We were like, we want to cry with other people who understand this. And so we realized that we needed places of healing so that we could be recharged and sent back into our diverse communities. And as long as the mission is still to be sent back into these communities as people of peace that we've called to be, then it's okay to have these other spaces that are just made to build us up. And so we started a Black women's small group, which turned into there was a Black men's group and a Black women's group. And then now we have an AAPI group, we have a Latino group, and we are looking to start a Native group. And the basis is places of healing so that we can then be sent back into the greater community in more healthy and authentic ways. Because if you don't have those spaces, you can't go back into that place in an authentic or healthy way. So, yeah.
Just really quickly, one of the things that I noticed about myself was when I would talk about like ministry, I would talk communally, but when I start talking about care, I would talk individually. How do you take care of yourself was always my language. In the work you're doing, how do you take care of yourself? What I get from this passage is if we're actually living in community, what will happen is there will be built in a structure of caring for one another. And I had to actually open myself up to allow people in my community who I didn't want to have to, no, I don't want you taking care of me, like to actually let them take care of me. Yeah. As a pastor, I came in from a culture of pastors where the pastor was deified. And pastor's anniversary and pastor gets special offerings and pastor got to this and that. And I was so against it. I'm like, nope, I don't know the anniversaries. I don't know none of that stuff because I don't want y'all deifying me. And then I started getting tired and realizing, man, maybe I do need to take that like trip to the spot they're trying to give me, man, because I can't afford it, right? And it really helped me to understand really what Jeremiah 29:7 is talking about. That's seek the peace and welfare of the city. In its welfare, you will find your welfare. I was helping people get jobs, start new career paths, do things like helping their kids graduate from school, go to college as the first one in their family, all these things, and was asking, no, I don't need anything from you. It's like, what? Right? Like I started accepting the fact that they're actually helping me too, taking care of my family. My family got a full paid trip to Disneyland in past November, right? I couldn't have took my family to Disney World. Like we just did not have it. But people saw all the work we were doing and invested into my family. There was a time where I would have been like, oh, I don't need that. But now I got teenagers who driving me crazy. And I was like, yeah, go on, bring me that. So my challenge is maybe we should reframe the question to just talk about care, not self-care all the time. I'm not saying self-care is bad. I'm just saying like, what does it look like to actually open yourself up to be cared for by the people you're caring for? That's my question.
That's good, man. Just one thing on the care piece. So much of my ministry is public, and really the private time that I do spend is really oftentimes to either preparing a talk or production or something like that. Like I do a lot of public ministry. So something I've been doing for years has been I go to a therapist once a month, and there's a guy I sit on his porch, Pastor Don. I've been walking with for 20 years. And, you know, whether I got finished talking to thousands of people or just one person, whether things great or it's terrible, if Joy and I are kind of at it, it's all there, you know? And she talks to him and we and his wife, and like we just have that. And I think that's the thing that I do. That's the thing that I encourage the Urban Doxology team to do, to be like rooted in a local church and be doing life with people. And we really do life for people. You know, we yell at each other, we laugh at each other, we cry, You know, we really, really do family. And I'm like, there's no shame in going to therapy. Like, you should probably go, particularly the more public that you are. And like the more you're in places where you're helping folks all the time, it's like that just needs to be a normal activity. So we really, really try to make that normal. And particularly as the elders at our church and the pastors at our church, we try to be the first to confess and the first to apologize. And so that's like another practice that I think we do. And just I was thinking about that communal care piece you talked about. One of the things that we do is we do testimony. We have a covenant community. And we get together, talk like church business. It'd be kind of like the church business meeting or any kind of thoughts, but we don't have members. We call covenant members. And we do a testimonies, just people get the chance to stories. And so you hear all kinds of people's testimonies. So you'll hear people who are like economic wealthy talk about some of the painful struggles that they're dealing with. And then you'll hear somebody who's been incarcerated and is somewhere or are drifting up or down the poverty line and tell incredible, like, resilient stories of faith and stuff. And that stuff saves me every single time I hear it. Every single time. It just moves me. So I think that the prayers, that kind of stuff, and like literally we use the language of being spiritual family really does help. But you do gotta, that can also be a lot, because it's just like you kind of do need times of, like, Jesus spent times going away, kind of engaging and re-engaging, and I think that rhythm is real important. Somebody had a hand up here. Okay.
So my garden doesn't grow in open dirt. I'm here in Michigan, and so what I would love to hear is stories or ideas that you guys have about engaging your kids in the cold months. Because, like when you mentioned it earlier, we all kind of haul up. Sure. And it's just part of the time. We can slow down, like have people in our houses more often than lately. But I'm curious, what have you guys done to press?
This is kind of like a higher level structural thing. But you actually said it, meeting in homes. Our church, we really value meeting in homes. It's on the same level with meeting publicly. And so I think that they're called house churches, but they function like a small group or a community group, whatever term people want to use. And it's because they're happening all year long, because people are just inside each other's houses all the time. So people in our neighbors are coming over to our houses. They just know it's regularly happening. So that way you don't have to do like a brand new thing if it's already a rhythm where you're meeting in each other's homes. When it's cold outside, you can be bundled up warm together, but that's kind of like on a higher level type of structure thing.
Two things. So I have two kids, and so we do a lot of play dates. And sometimes my wife is like, okay, let's do play dates, but also as an excuse to hang out with our neighbors who have kids as well. So she's kind of like two motives. But also, too, I'm a sports guy. And so I've often done like, hey, I realize some of my neighbors, they love to watch football. So during the football season, I was really intentional of having people over. And so that, I use sports as a way of connecting. And so like, hey, let's do this sporting event. So that's ways that I've tried to connect. And obviously, you can't be outside in the wintertime. Some of my neighbors are outside. And I think if I had a dog, maybe I would be outside with them more, but I don't. But those are two things that I've tried to do. My kids, play dates, and we use those play dates for adults hanging out as well and sporting events. So.
Kind of a piggyback off of what she said. So there's a Bible study that happens every week, and that's a community Bible study. So it's hosted at our church, but it's open to the community. So that's always happening. They always have lunch. So a time frame that might work for your community or church. That's one. And then the church that I used to work at did these things called hangs, because they're hip. And so they do hangs. And so every semester was a new kind of hang. And so they specifically did, so it's like the community groups that meet in houses, but they meet in places. So there was a group of guys that did like a brewery hang. So every week they went to a different brewery and met together. There was a the yoga one probably wasn't the winter, but different things like that are more winter. There's a bowling hang. There's a specifically a book club one, but there are specific things that the church can sign up for and do that way. And then community is welcome. They put it on their website and stuff.
We're not a very liturgical church, so we don't like follow the church calendar or anything like that. I'm actually learning more about that as I've pastored longer and done seminary and all those things. But we always have had kind of like a engagement calendar where, being in Chicago, two things are true. It's going to get cold, and it's going to be cold for a long time. And in the summer, nobody's even coming to church or like trying to do like activity. That's just the reality. Like your offering's gonna dip, like all these pastoral realities, because people are going out. They're gonna enjoy the lakefront. They're gonna do all these things. It's just the reality. So our calendar has always been that we do less in the summer, actually do more when it's cold. And so, but what we found is if we were going to do things in the cold, it was going to take partnership. So now we try to create, I think it was you who talked about third spaces, right? Like we try to create a place where we're partnering with another organization or something in the neighborhood where it's an actually intentional place where everybody's gonna meet up and do something. We very rarely do church-oriented stuff when we're trying to create stuff in the winter. So like the spring is when we mostly do small groups, like and affinity groups and all those things. But in the winter when it's really, really cold, the cafe that we help open has like a thing called Sound Voyage. And Sound Voyage is kind of like our concert season in Inglewood. And what residents said was, we want Inglewood to once again be a destination. There was a time in its history when it was a destination spot. It was the second largest commercial district to the Magnificent Mile in Chicago. It was the spot. And we don't want to get that back. So we literally have concerts at the cafe, jazz, blues, classical, whatever, right? To bring not only people from our neighborhood, but people from all over the city to this space as a destination. And so we begin to partner with people on that level. My church cannot afford to put on like classical concerts. We don't have that kind of money to pay. But when you partner with 3 or 4 different organizations in the community, it does 2 things for you. It makes sure the capital is actually there to get that done, but it also reframes the way people begin to think about the church and its connection in the neighborhood. So I think all the things they talked about, like churches do specifically, is really good. But I think churches need to get out the box and remind ourselves of our collective power and recognize we don't always have to create stuff. Sometimes you just need to get on board with what's already being created, especially when it's cold. And then, we'll be able to connect, and it does a better thing for us in the summertime. Now everybody expects me to be at the park takeover and all the things that everybody's doing in the summer when all of my congregants are gone. I got plenty to do, right? And the church is still represented at those things. So.
In the back.
I can give a pretty concrete example. So I kind of low-key feel like I might be in exile right now. However, I am a woman that is not married, but I am one of the senior leaders at the church. I'm a pastor and an elder at my church. I preach twice a month. I'm in charge of shaping the worship culture. But I think and this is the thing that's in the back of my head, Lord, please don't do this. But if I were to go back into a place of exile, it would go back to the church that I grew up in, the church that made me who I am, where women do not lead. Women, only men do. The way I dress would be completely different, honey. If y'all heard Dr. Martin's sermon this morning where it's like Pentecostal, no earrings, no makeup, no pants, that's my parents' church. So it would look like, even though right now I feel like, I'm laboring for the Lord, I'm being poured out like a drink offering, I'm still able to exercise a level of authority that I feel like I should have. But I think exile looks like being obedient in a place where I can't do the thing that I feel like God has called me to do. Where if I'm in a season of not being able to exercise the gift that I know that God has given me, and will I be faithful to the thing God has told me to do in a place that feels foreign to me after a place of relative freedom? I think about it all the time.
I'm not gonna front. It would be hard. But one thing I've realized too, I've moved around a lot. So I've lived in New Jersey, I've lived in South Carolina, I've lived in Tennessee, I've lived in Oklahoma, Chicago, now suburb. So I've realized I've moved around a lot, and so, but I'm at a place now. I also realize there's seasons of life, right? And God's had me through all those seasons, and I've learned many lessons through all those journeys, and so. And again, it comes back to what Jay said earlier, is that God's presence has been with me throughout those journeys, and so I've remembered. I can remember those things. And my wife and I, we've talked about that, and we were like, yeah, we ain't gonna front. It would be hard, but God's had us thus far, and He will continue. And so that's one thing that I continue just to remember. And it's a season of life. You know, this too may pass. So. But I'm not gonna front. Yeah, that's a great question. It would be hard.
This is always where I get in trouble because of my definition of exile in the book. And I wrote it that way intentionally so that people, when they read the subtitle of Neglected Neighborhoods, they wouldn't go, oh man, he's doing that hard work in that rough neighborhood. That's not what I was talking about. I'm literally talking about the place you don't want to be, whether that's back at your old church, moving down in the suburbs, living in the city, rural place, back home, with, back in that marriage you should have never been in, whatever. And so I get in trouble with it because I harp about comfortability. And what happens the more you reside in a place and get connected there is Inglewood hasn't felt like exile for me in a very long time. I love my neighborhood. Like people will tell you, typically I got something on that say Inglewood. I'm wearing coats, hats. Like I am Mr. Inglewood. Like I love my neighborhood. Now, there's still hard stuff that happened, and but I really don't want to be anywhere else. And it scares me. Yeah. Because if God is all about doing the most with us through uncomfortability, what does that mean for me as I get more and more comfortable in a place that used to feel 14, 15, 16 years ago very exilish? I've had to really pray and ask God, God, when you write a book, you're supposed to say stuff like this. If I made an idol out of my place. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I never wanted to ever ask myself that question, right? Was I falling in love with place or that place? Mm-hmm. Had I made what used to be exile into Jerusalem to the point where I was idolizing it and God gonna send me to the land of idols? See what I'm saying? So when you asked the question, I was like, man, she all in my life. The opportunities in my life right now lead me into different seasons, and I've always rejected them because I love where I do and where I live. And the question becomes, am I going to go through the hard work again of God having to force me to listen, put me through all types of crap because I want to do what I want to do? My mom's sick in the hospital because I could finally come home from college because I was never coming back to Chicago, those type of things. Like, God had to go through drastic measures to get me to listen. Do I really want to do that again and be carried into exile? Or am I going to say, God, I know that uncomfortability is where I grow the most. So I'm with T, it's going to be hard, and I'm actually not looking forward to it. So even people who consider themselves having experienced this, it's a journey that takes us into the unknown consistently where we follow God there. So check back with me in some years. Hopefully I get some years. And we'll see what God's doing. But that's a question that I think about all the time.
I want to answer that too. I hate following you, but here we go. I anticipate it. I definitely feel like I'm in a place of exile because I've even experienced feeling exiled from the things that I cultivated for the very people who I felt like, you know, even the things that I've started for myself and not being able to reap some of the fruit from the things that were planted that I originally planted for me to be, you know, in that place. But I, being a PK from a church planting family, I think that I've gotten to the point in my life where God being able to pick me up and place me wherever he desires is his call on my life. So there is no other option. And I am better for it. And I even, to be honest, I feel like it's a part of my legacy, my father, you know, as far as ministry and God being like, I feel like I want to be able to trust you with picking you up and taking you wherever and you being whatever I've called you to be in that place. So as I've worked through that, I think now I'm anticipating that from God and it being, and trying to cultivate a heart of gratitude that God would even still see me fit to pick me up and place me wherever. So that's.
January.
You said imposter. Yeah.
I'm like dropping my stuff. That's an excellent question. I don't think I have tools for that. I think God is actually dragging me through this process as we speak of saying, I just feel like over the past year, God has been telling me, did I call you to this or did a group of people call you to this? And I think it just has been a time of reckoning and a lot of trials and anguish and suffering, if I'm going to be honest, and having to like constantly come to, did God call me to this or did people call me to it? Because if people call me to it, I can walk away. I can go work at the bank. I can go live in the suburbs and never think twice about, I mean, I can just be a Christian and go to heaven and not have to live any kind of sacrifice. But I think as far as like tools, I think God is trying to say through you, girl, maybe Erin, you should start developing some tools to get your mind like ready to respond to those types of attacks quicker. Because yeah, it just feels like, is what I'm doing even working? Does anybody even see me? Does anybody even care? What is it for nothing? And a lot of times it feels like that, and that is overwhelming, especially when you've given your whole life to a thing. But I think that the Spirit has this way of confirming and affirming and drawing us back to like the promise that he gave, to the calling that he gave. Even when we're kicking and screaming, will still draw us completely back unto himself. So yeah, thank you for that word of encouragement. I'm going to go to my prayer closet and ask for some tools.
I find it's a very evolving thing, because I think particularly with all of us up here, because we're both like very rooted in place, and we also very like kind of outwardly focused national kind of ministry space, and so we're like in and out of both worlds. So sometimes you just feel like you're kind of like halfway into different spaces. I mean, like, yeah, and you miss out on stuff. Like I'm gonna miss some baby showers, you know. I'm gonna miss like, or you know, depend on certain weddings because there might be certain things, and it's just and people are like very local, and like some people that you're like with, they don't really understand your world, and you could be very frustrated with it. But you're also bringing resources back into your community, but you got to go out to go get it, because it's either not in your community, or the people who are in your community don't give it to people of color to distribute that. They give it to the white people. And this is a very real thing. So a lot of times you got to kind of like do the talk, do the dance, do the show, bring that resource back into your community. And so, and that's just a very, like, a lot of people, that's a hard thing to like, people in our community don't understand that. And so, like, I think one thing that's been really great for Brooks and I is that, this guy, older guy named Leroy Barber, and his wife, Donna, they started this thing called Voices. And because they looked up in 30 years, they've been in predominantly white evangelical spaces, and they spent a lot of that leadership development energy, majority raising white leaders, and find themselves supplementing leaders of color. And then probably 10 years ago? 10 years ago, Leroy and Donna saw me and Brooks, and I guess 10 years ago we was like in our 20s, like late 20s, like just turned 30, something like that. And so it's kind of crazy now. We like the elders of the JAG, and I don't know when that happened, but it's that has been like, I don't know if it wasn't for being around people who were before me earlier. Like, I don't literally know if I could survive this type of thing. And then sometimes Brooks and I would talk on the phone, and just like we could just talk and just be, and we kind of get it. We ain't got to explain nothing to each other. We can listen, empathize, encourage, rebuke, whatever needs to happen. And I think that's one of those types of things. And it's tough because, like, when you're out here, like, there's a temptation to kind of only tell the best stories and tell the ones that are like, oh, this is how, and like sometimes people can pat you on the back, et cetera, et cetera. But you also kind of know that, like, I try to tell both sides of it, like kind of the beauty and the brokenness of it, to try to stay honest, about kind of what's happening. And there's a lot of beautiful things, and there's a lot of broken things, a lot of stuff that we're figuring out. And so I think these are some of the practices that we try to do, and are figuring it out.
Can I ask you a question? Is the community or context that you're in, do you have like a safety net? Like, is your church, if you're speaking about church specifically, or like the ministry that you're in, if you say something weird, is it a safety net place, or is it a like, she's never getting the mic for the next 5 months place? Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then what about like mentors, or like a leader kind of very specifically walking with you? Okay. Because this is, I don't think it's exactly what you're asking, but David Bailey has been kind of that tool for me. I remember the first time I did this was actually at a Calvin worship symposium, and he was like, y'all gonna be on a panel, and I was like, I'm sorry, what? And I didn't know that I had the language or the tools for this until he was like, all right. And David Bailey, I love you so much. He not gonna put something in your hands that he don't think you can. That's just not, like what he said earlier, he's the producer that the best soloist for the job. He also uplifts leaders, so I'm not like calling him out. But if David Bailey's gonna put you on a panel, you have something to say. Does that make sense? And so I would just suggest that you really lean into who your people are, and have the faith to keep failing forward and find those things. And like, because it's sometimes you're not going to get that security. You just got to keep going and failing forward. And you have a story. You have a story. I can just see it on you. Like, and so you have purpose in you, and God don't just put you in new places. He calls you to discomfort, but he's the comforter, right? And so he's not going to let you go there and be an imposter. There's no such thing.
Amen. Praise the Lord. Well, thanks so much. This is the hour and 15 break that seems to be much needed. And so make sure you get to a Vesper service. There are plenty that are going to be really, really great. You say what?